What we're speaking of is the end of the possibility of escape. So there's no more plans, escape plans. Simply because there isn't anywhere to escape to. There's nowhere else. It's not that there can't be imagination, but the one who may have spent quite a bit of time escaping, seemingly, into imagined worlds, imagined places, imagined dimensions, imaginary life. He or she might just stop turning up. And then the desire to escape just doesn't appear. We're also speaking of the impossibility of hiding. One of the reasons you might talk about this as liberation is because there's no one who could hide. There's no one who could escape. And sometimes this is talked about as perfection. I don't think you've heard me say that, because it's the end of that dream. That dream of perfection is a fantasy. I think I understand why the word perfection is sometimes used, and that it couldn't be otherwise. But perfection is just a fantasy. Everything is simply as it is. And judgments about perfection and imperfection can still arise, but they mean nothing. There isn't a movement towards perfection. And again, that's why you might talk about this as peace and rest and ease. Because so much of what we call so much effort by me is towards this imagined fantasy of perfection. So I could say that life is perfectly imperfect, but even that doesn't mean anything. Really, everything is simply as it is. And so there can be disappointment. It's not what you fantasized. It's not what you hoped for. It's not what you dreamt of. Of course it isn't. It's simply this. But fuck, it's nice to have a rest from the constant striving, the constant seeking, the constant criticism, the constant longing. I say constant, it's never constant really, but for most selves, it's quite frequent. The criticism of myself, the criticism of my friends, my family, my life, the world, politics, is endless. And so we're not speaking about finding an answer. That's why I might say it's disappointing, because of course I always wanted an answer. Not just one answer, the answer. And what we're speaking about is the end of questions, not an answer to them. Even if the questions occur, they're seen for what they are, which is they're empty. I give them all the meaning that they have. Don't tell other selves that their questions are empty, because they won't like it, but they are empty. It can simply be obvious that this isn't knowable. And in the impossibility of knowing, there's the peace and rest that was longed for. Now, it's not how it was imagined that it might be, but it's such a simple ease to not be questioning life constantly. And by life, really, I mainly mean myself, which is what self is constantly doing. Self-checking, self-criticizing, self-analyzing, hiding, running. And it might be obvious that you never moved. I think everyone who resonates in any way with this message, then that intuitive knowing, you might say, that really you've never moved. And the sense that you've never moved really is that this doesn't move. It's not that you don't move. There's no you to move or be still. This is unmoving, appearing to move. And so it can be really disconcerting, even if you get a taste or a glimpse or a whiff of this, then it can be very disconcerting. It can be frightening, terrifying. What the hell am I going to do now? Now there's nothing to do. What am I to do with emptiness? And there isn't an answer to that question. If that question comes up, then there isn't an answer to that either, other than anything. This is the end of there being correct answers, a right answer or a wrong answer, when all answers are empty. It is the unknowableness that is the freedom. The impossibility. The wonderful impossibility of getting it right. It's like liberation for the school child who was so afraid of getting the answer wrong in class that they never participated, never put their hand up for fear of getting it wrong. Self's always afraid of getting it wrong. I don't mean others won't tell you you're getting it wrong. That's almost certain to happen. And I don't mean that won't necessarily be, that might cause pain, it might hurt, but it doesn't matter. Freedom from self-criticism. I guess that's one of the main reasons I speak about this. Knowing what a bastard self can be. In its quest for perfection. Of course, each self has its own definition of that perfection. So it may appear that there's a self that's completely free of that perfectionism. Well, it could well be that self's perfectionism is, is what you'd call failure. Self will take anything in order to feel a little bit better about itself. Well, I think I'm disguising it quite well, but I'm actually really full of cold. And what I could say is bordering on self-pity, but of course, being liberated, that's an impossibility. But I have felt a little sorry for myself this afternoon. Borderline man flu. If you'd like to ask a question, then just put your hand up, or if you want to share anything, then do so. Just chirp in. Hi, Faith.
Hello, my love.
Hello, darling.
Sorry about Sorry about the flu. I don't know why I'm laughing. I'm just
Sorry about what?
sorry about laughing. Sorry about the flu, and I'm sorry I'm finding it funny. But
Yeah, thanks. No, I love that. It's very sympathetic.
you've done your lateral flow test, have you?
I haven't done one, no. It's a cold. You know, you can recognise a cold. I've had enough. I recognise it.
Anyway, darling, Tony talks about an energetic shift.
Yeah.
And
He does, yeah.
And he talks about the me falling away.
Yeah.
Over to you.
What do you mean? That's a statement. That's not a question. Ask me a question. That's a statement of what Tony says.
I know.
You want me to agree or disagree, don't you?
I would like you to add.
Well, the thing about
brainwashed by Tony.
I don't know. The thing about energetic shift, I don't know about that. I don't know.
That's a good answer.
I would be really frank and say I don't really understand what he's talking about.
Oh, that's
because I don't recognize it as an energetic shift. So there's no recognition of that at all. I don't know what it means. But that, you know, but the words don't matter. You could call it an energetic shift in that, you know, that the illusion of self is an energetic illusion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. So what I would say is intellectually, I get that and I can rationalize it. I can sort of understand it. But experientially, I don't have any experience of. Number one, there was no experience of a shift, energetic or otherwise.
And the me falling away.
Now, me falling away, and I've described my me's very reluctant abdication of the throne, dragged, kicking and screaming, you know, being torn limb from, literally, like, you name the sharp implements that were dug into my flesh. There was no holds barred. So it wasn't a fading away. It wasn't falling away. It was a dragged, kicking and screaming away that seemed to go on for months. There you go. That's jolly, isn't it? But there you go. It can go anyhow, can't it? You know, because the only thing that's really obvious in the seeming absence of that energy, illusion, whatever, you won't know. I mean, the whole illusion of me is that I do know what I'm speaking about as myself. That's what seemingly doesn't appear anymore. What doesn't appear is the illusion that I know who I am, what I am, that I am. Just nothing in its place. So energetic shift sounds like I went from me energy to, I don't know, nothing energy or emptiness energy or everything energy or however you want, or pure, or, you know, all, to me, they're all of that is fantasy. The only thing I really can speak about is emptiness. So what seemed to be me, full of myself, was replaced with nothing.
And another question, what prompted you, why did you suddenly start speaking about this? Why did you feel emboldened, empowered, whatever it was, to say, okay, I'm going to talk about this now. Oh, bugger it. Right. Dr. Pencil.
Yeah, that's a good question, Faith. I like talking.
Mm-hmm.
You've noticed that. So what I've been a talker all my life as a teacher, and I really enjoyed that. I like being center of attention. This character does, you know. I mean, very obviously, when I used to go and see Tony loved being at the front.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I love being at the front as well. You know, you don't need a self to, the character naturally likes what it likes. I like being looked at, I mean, I was a terrible attention-seeking child. You know, the most annoying children who the adults are all trying to enjoy it themselves, and then there's a child, you've gone around somebody's house and their children are there, and there's a really annoying child who just wants to look at me, look at me.
That was you.
Yeah. Terrible.
Good confession.
So in a way, I mean, there's the answer. So a character, a human being who naturally enjoys speaking and likes the attention and has studied non-duality, been obsessively studying non-duality for 10 years. It's not surprising that that character then starts speaking about it, is it? Really?
Thank you. You are a very entertaining speaker.
Oh, thanks.
And then that goes to your head.
I will say there is I mean there are plenty of, I think there are plenty of human beings whose self has, whatever we're going to say it does, stopped appearing. I think it's the best way of saying it.
Yeah.
You know, because if you talk about what happened to it, it's all bollocks, actually. You know, it can be how it seemed, but what is obvious in the non-appearance is that nothing happened. There was no me. I mean, everyone who I've ever listened to and enjoyed listening to, they may speak about this in a different way. That is the really universal. That's the crux. That in the absence of me, it's obvious that me never was. Now, how that is obvious, I haven't got a fucking clue. And anyone, I mean, again, you just don't know the answers to those questions, but that life did feel as though it was mine. It just seemed to be, yeah, it definitely did feel that way. I haven't forgotten that. But there was nothing lost in the seeming loss of that. So the only way I then can talk about it is as, well, it must have been illusory. There really wasn't a me. And so if there really wasn't a me before in the story, then there is no me anywhere. Every human being with a sense of self is suffering under a delusion, under a, you can call it energetic, you can describe it any way you want, but that this whole illusion of being in control, of being the manager, the controller, the doer, the thinker, the feeler, is illusory. I mean, illusory is, I haven't got a better word. I sort of wish I had, but.
So it really is a tale of sound and fury, blah, blah, blah.
Signifying nothing.
Sorry?
Signifying nothing.
How come you've got a cold and you haven't sneezed or blown your nose?
I'll tell you how I've got a cold. My son's had a cold and he couldn't sleep, so he slept with me. And of course, he's right in my face, sneezing in my face. What a surprise, I've got a cold. I mean, I can talk about there's no cause and effect, but in the story of cause and effect, it's bloody obvious how I got it.
What a loving daddy.
Oh, there's nothing. I mean, that's the greatest joy. Going to sleep with holding a little boy's hand is a beautiful thing.
And the cold, well.
Yeah, the cold. Yes, worth the cold.
Worth the cold. Good.
Yeah. I will say about anything that you've ever heard about what happens to a human being to become liberated, to become enlightened, to become awakened, whatever terms you like the sound of. I mean, this is the destruction of all of that. They all mean nothing. There is only this, and this is already as it is, and as it is includes the sense that it is me living this life, or the sense of I don't know. Because of course the other great illusion is that I'll know that I'm not a self anymore. There's no knowing of that.
But the search is great fun in many ways, and you
Well,
that
I would. Is it though? Is it? It gives you something to do. It's fucking horrible. Is it fun? I don't think it's fun.
These are fantastic people.
Yeah, you do that. I met a lot of lovely people, but nearly all of them were suffering like shit.
Right.
They were lovely. Nearly all the people I met going to non-duality talks, or just, you know, generally who were seeking truth, reality, liberation, whatever they were seeking. There was immense suffering in it. But boy, I mean, it does give, I mean, it's really powerful. It gives me something really, I've always got something to do. And one of the hardest things about that not appearing anymore is, what the fuck am I going to do now? Because it was filled, my life was absolutely filled with that. I mean, all consuming. My sense of self was consumed with this quest.
And now it's all gone.
Yeah. And I can't emphasize enough, it's not replaced by anything. Of course, that's unimaginable. I couldn't imagine that. So when that's why, you know, it's really difficult to speak about this, because it sounds like, because you can only imagine. So as me, I could only imagine what no self would feel like to me. I mean, how else am I going to imagine it? And really, there is nothing in my place. There never was anything in my place. My place was created by me.
Mm.
So me is its own, you could say, you know, self is its own creation. It's self-perpetuating.
Mm.
So in that sense, I get why you could talk about it as energetic.
Right.
But there isn't an energy in itself in that replaces that. So the energy of me was really most of what I'd say in terms of emotional feeling, which is how I tend to talk about maybe what Tony calls energy, is how it feels, is replaced by nothing, by emptiness, which isn't something. You can't speak about it, it's nothing. And really, that was overwhelming. So I could only infer, and I can say now, I can still only infer the absence of myself just by the absence of the symptoms that I was aware that I created for this human being. Mainly fear. Now, I'm not saying I'm completely fearless, but when self-consciousness doesn't appear, because there's nothing to be conscious of itself, it just doesn't happen, then of course most fear, you know, there's no fear of humiliation. Fear of failure was massive for me. Fear of aging, fear of death, fear of non-existence, fear of emptiness, fear of not knowing. Really, fear of nothing is the real, I mean, most selves never go near that. They keep their fears quite material. But the fear of not knowing, which is the abyss, the void, is absolute terror for self, because it's very obvious to self that I can't exist in nothing because I'm something.
A good point to end on. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Faye. It's not as bad as it sounds.
Tim, can you talk a little about the kicking and the screaming?
John, just to let you know, John has his hand up. He's had his hand up for quite a while. But who was that?
Sorry.
Who was that just asking a question?
I was Lynette.
Joyce.
Was it
I'll
Lynette?
put my hand up.
Joyce, can we go with John and then we'll come to you straight after? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Thanks, Joyce. John.
Thanks, Darren. Hi, Tim.
Hi.
I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and they were trying to understand what could be the motivation for a speaker. How could there be a motivation for someone to speak if there is no self? And in a way, you actually just answered that question talking to Faith. But my answer was, and I think this is more as what you've just been saying, that the motivation to speak, or rather the enjoyment of speaking, actually doesn't require a self, because there's part of it that's to do with the character.
Yeah.
You know, those of us that like being the center of attention, we like performing, we like people laugh. That doesn't, curiously enough, it doesn't require a self. And yet there are a number of speakers who do seem to have those characteristics. But in the retreat you just did, you were talking there, and I've heard you say it before, about how there's a different sort of motivation rather than there's just the performance side of it. Which is a sort of desire to share with people the insight that there's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah. I mean, I just touched on that. I could get, I've got a reluctance. So I sort of played it down there and just said it's naturally I'm a show off, which is true, but that's not the motivation really. That's just an explanation that kind of makes sense. The motivation comes from compassion. There's no doubt about that. And I could say that, it comes from love. This is a message of love. I mean, it's the most ruthless love, but it is, yeah.
The thing is, to me, compassion. It's that com at the beginning. That prefix has to do with like company. It does sort of, as a word, it implies two people, two poles.
Yeah.
So how can I maintain the argument that compassion is arising if there is no sense of a self?
Yeah, well, that's that's just the arrogance of self, really. Really, I mean that. That self says, okay, well, without me, there would be no compassion. That self says that. Self will claims everything for itself. So it's me that's loving, it's me that's compassionate. And without self, compassion makes no sense. Well, I couldn't give a shit that it makes no sense. It's absolutely bollocks that it's your compassion. Human beings are naturally compassionate animals.
I just having said that, I realize that, I have that doubt about the word compassion, but I don't have any doubt about the word love, in the sense that it's quite obvious to me that like you say, love is simply, in its unconditional state, in the sort of way most people use it, is definitely there are two poles and there's a power game going on and all that sort of stuff. But in its purest unconditional state, it simply arises. It just simply arises. And if you try and explain why, well, it's a mystery.
Yeah. And I could say the same with compassion. Compassion is a mystery.
Yeah. It's just another word for the same thing in a way.
I think so. Yeah. I almost use those words interchangeably, really.
Yeah.
But there is, without me being so self-absorbed because of myself, self-interested, self-obsessed, one might say. Of course, whatever there is being this human being, there's so much energy, you could say, freed up for compassion for other human beings without anything in it for me. Or maybe something for you and me. Because one of the great paradox of this is, of course, you and me still exist as human beings. The only change, you could say, is that I don't see another me because I don't see myself. And I mean, it's really a change that's no change at all. And because this isn't philosophical in any way, this isn't a system of thought or a way of being, or it's nothing to do with that. It's just simply saying there can be the absence of this sense of me being inside and me being separate. And without me being separate, of course, there is so much more compassion for every other human being. It really is. I mean, it's and there can be no pride in it. There can be there's no claiming of it. And it's very simple. It's really simple and direct and obvious.
Yeah.
Thanks, John.
Joyce.
Joyce, yeah. Hi, Joyce.
Hi. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
I relate to what you said about compassion with John, because I feel that this me gets so in the way of that. It's just so stuck on my own comfort or discomfort and suffering. Like you said, it's endless. And when I have moments of not being identified with the me, not letting the me rule me, then my heart is flowing and there's love. And I feel it right now with everyone here. So what I wanted to ask you was, you were speaking with Faith about the kicking and the screaming and the me and holding on to the me. I identify with that. I'd like to hear more about your process. Not that you did anything to make it happen, but what was that like, and how did it let go, and how?
It was dreadful. It was dreadful, Joyce. There was no I kicked and screamed. I was fighting. It was like I was fighting for my life. It was all against, what is most obvious is it was all against my will. That's why I can't tolerate any speaking about non-duality that talks about process of how you might get there or how you might move towards, because all the experience that I seem to go through, what was most clear about that experience was that I would never choose. I would never choose emptiness. I would never choose to be non-existent. I don't mean die, because there isn't actually a one to die, but it feels like I will die. And there's something even worse than death. I've spoken about this before. There is underneath the fear of death, which virtually all selves I know have this fear of dying. There is a fear greater than that, which is that I never existed. So not being born is worse than dying. Not having lived is worse than dying. For me.
Yeah, I can't relate to that because it's so, I guess, painful to.
It was, the thing is, it wasn't like, the word annihilation came up all the time. That's the word that, when I was experiencing that, and it did feel like it was my experience. It was me who was fighting for my life. Now, the irony, I mean, there is great irony in this, is of course I asked for this, like you lot. I asked for it. It fucking came. I said, piss off, leave me alone. This is not what I asked for. And it's like, no, there was no reply. There's never a reply. And I mean, I was having these conversations with no one, with life. And I would scream out loud, mostly screaming in thought, but sometimes it was when it became excruciating, because it wasn't just psychologically excruciating, it did feel physical as well.
In what sense?
It felt like having my guts torn out.
Oh.
It did. I mean, it wasn't, that doesn't happen, but it did feel like that.
I think the resistance of the me was what created the suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you can't really surrender. It just has to be a process, right? You can't.
Well, I just don't think there is no process. I mean, that's
Yeah.
again, don't ask me how that's obvious, but without time, of course, there can be no process.
Mm.
And I can tell the story of all of that happened, but it's very obvious that none of that happened.
But
There
then
is
the
only
me dissolved.
there is only this, the only thing that happens is this happening. And you can't find this happening because it's all there is. There is no one outside to be looking in at this happening. That's the whole illusion. The whole illusion this illusion that self creates is that I can watch. I'm the observer. I'm the witness. We're speaking about the death of the witness. There's no one witnessing.
But there was
I know it's bloody convincing.
Right.
I mean, that is it's a very convincing illusion that, no, I am separate and I am witnessing what's happening. No, there is only what's happening.
It appears as though there was a suffering self who held on for dear life and finally somehow let go, and then me was gone. And that's not correct.
No, I didn't let go.
You never let go?
No.
Consciously.
In the story, it went from holding on for dear, kicking, screaming, fighting, spitting, biting. I'm doing anything to not be killed. And then I just don't know. There wasn't a point of surrender or letting go or falling or.
No choice.
Absolutely choiceless, without doubt. Yeah, that's very clear. It's a bit like, when you die in a dream.
Mm.
Well, you never die, do you? The dream of falling and you wake just before you hit the ground. I don't know. I had that
Many years,
a lot throughout my life. I don't think I have it anymore, but I used to have that dream a lot. Well, you never get to the point of death, do you? You don't know anything about it. It's a waking usually. I don't know anyone who's had a dream and they've experienced death in their dream. The dream death. Do you? I don't know anyone. Maybe some people have.
The edge, coming to the edge.
Because there is no one who dies. Human beings die. not selves. I don't, you don't, but human beings do. And strangely, there's more love. I mean, there's the greatest mystery of all. There's more love, so much more love without me and you.
Yeah, I don't get it, but thank you.
Thanks, Joyce.
Sarah, or is it Sarah maybe? She says, is Tim alive? I mean, if there's no time, is Tim alive?
Yeah. Depends what you mean by Tim, doesn't it? Human being known as Tim Cliss. Yeah, as alive as a tree or the grass or a rock. It's funny, we have this idea of alive. One thing that is really clear is there isn't anything that isn't alive that's happening. So, you know, the rock is just as alive as the tree or a human being or a cat. So inanimate objects are just as alive. There is only aliveness, you could say. So the illusion is that there's dead or alive. Everything is alive and dead. By dead, I would mean empty. So the aliveness is the fullness, and the emptiness is, you could say, is death. The fullness, the aliveness is existence, and the emptiness is non-existence. And it's all not two. It's not one. It's just not two. There are no opposites. So I use the word this, and it's not a good word because of course it has the opposite, that. But in the most simple terms, this is that, and that is this, and that's that. Oh dear. Really, all it, I mean, it sounds like I'm being flippant saying that. I'm not really. That is really how it is. So whatever you're calling that, that is this. And whatever you're calling this, this is that. And that is of no worth whatsoever. The most wonderful thing about all of this bullshit talk that I love speaking is that it is completely and utterly useless. If it was useful, I couldn't do it. And by useless, I mean it doesn't have a point other than communicating, sharing. I mean, and you could say the point of compassion, but it doesn't mean anything. And when I talk about emptiness, really, that's really what I mean. What I mean by emptiness is that emptiness doesn't have meaning. Empty of a point, empty of meaning, which of course my life was always full of that, constantly creating meaning and purpose and value. And it is a mystery that when all of life, all human life and all life, what we would call life, is empty of meaning and purpose, that feels like unconditional love. I will say it's not unconditional love. Unconditional love is not a thing. There is no such thing. I'm just using those words as a description. I mean, don't get hung up on love. One of the great freedoms is you're no longer, without me, no longer hung up on love. And love is liberated. There you go. That's one of the great liberations, is that you were is hung up on love, you know, longing for love. Well, the longing for love is the end of that, because everything is love when everything is absolutely empty, and that is total equality. I mean, emptiness can't be love, can it? It makes no bloody sense. There we are. Well, if you're hanging around North London on Saturday afternoon, you can come and have a chat and a cup of coffee at the Philadelphia Association of Hampstead High Street. Ricky Gervais is going to be there, apparently. Oh, it's not. He lives around the corner, though. Darren showed me his house. It's full of celebrities in Hampstead. Once I publish my second book, which is The Powerless of Now, and it's going to sell about 8 million copies, then I'm going to buy a place in Hampstead. Because it's such a lovely place. It's 10 minutes to the city centre, and you're in this beautiful countryside in London. It's in London, but not in London. If you've never been, it's really beautiful. Anyway, I'm there on Saturday if you're about. Has anybody else got anything they'd like to say or ask?
Oh, Anita, she just left a message. Yeah, it's almost finished, Anita. We started an hour ago. Yeah, sorry.
What, has Anita just arrived?
Yeah.
Oh.
Ted said that he'd normally have a question, but he's been rendered speechless.
Oh, good work, Tim.
Yeah.
I'll give another plug. If you can't make it to London on Saturday, Marcus, I'm talking to you, stop laughing. You might be able to come to Brighton in a month's time. So on the 19th of March, I'm in Brighton giving a talk, and I'll put all the details, and I'll email you the details of that. So I'm excited about that because it's a weekend at the seaside. Who doesn't love that? So I'll be selling tickets for that because it's at a friend's house, so there's limited space rather than on the door. So I'll probably send that out, the details of that out next week. Marcus, why have you got a mask on? That doesn't make any sense. You're in front of a screen. Oh, you're at work. Oh, he's getting paid to watch this. Good work. I just thought, why were you sitting in front of your computer screen wearing a mask? Taking it a bit far. Well, thanks very much for coming.
Thanks, Tim.
And thanks, Darren.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, nice. Nice to see you all.
Thanks, Tim. Get better.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Feel better.
All the
Tim.
best.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you. Well, I'm going to get dosed up now.